Oh, okay. So, good morning. My
Good
name is
morning.
Joan Jack, and this is Brave Indigenous Conversations. And our guest this morning is Sheila North. But before we begin, I'm going to start with the piece of writing I found shortly after starting the podcast, and I just love it. It's called "An Invitation to a Brave Space." Together, we will create brave space because there is no such thing as safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together. And we will work on it side by side. That was written by a woman, a Black woman, Mickey Scott B. Jones. And I just love it. All right. So, like
Mhm.
I said, we have Sheila North with us this morning, which is amazing because I think you're amazing. So, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great, Sheila.
Okay, danse gakinaw gradamis gatino Sheila North the Snegasan Bonbonnaby Cree Nation Dinoste. Hi, my name is Sheila North from the Bonbonnaby Cree Nation. Good to be with you, Joan, and all of your guests and all your amazing aunties and kukums from around the world. I am a kukum and I'm a mom, and I come from a big family in Bonbonnaby and Cross Lake in northern Manitoba. I'm a former journalist, former Grand Chief, and now I'm working at the International Commission on Missing Persons out of the Netherlands. And I'm very happy to be here.
I'm so thrilled that you've made the time to be with us because I know, like most people, everybody doesn't matter whether you're on income assistance or you're on an international committee. Everyone's busy. There's very few people that don't, that aren't busy. So I appreciate you making the time. Um, you talked about being a journalist, the Grand Chief, and then where you're at now. It would be really, I'm genuinely interested in hearing, you talk about each of those things. Like, where were you a journalist?
I was a journalist most of the time at CBC here in Manitoba, Winnipeg. I spent 7 years the first time there, and then I left to go work at AMC as a communications person for Grand Chief Derek Nepenak at the time. And that's where we met Joan during my time there. And then we got so effective at what we were doing, advocating for our communities, that we got funding chopped. 80%, 80% of the funding got chopped. So I had to go back into the field, which I loved anyway. So I went to CTV for about 18 months, close to 2 years. And then I got pulled back in, and then I ran for MKO and became the first female Grand Chief at MKO. So I've written for other communication, other papers and journals and stuff like that. So I think I was in journalism for probably 15 years. Most
Mm.
recently, I went back to CBC for another 18 months, and I lived out my lifelong dream to be a host on CBC Manitoba. So I was able to host late night news broadcast for a time, and so that's all part of my journalism career so far.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
for, I was thinking what came to mind was, our young people that are listening or anyone, but mostly it came to mind as young people, like if they want to have a career in journalism, what would you say to them?
Well, I think there is a lot of good programs out there that it would be good to take. There are now organizations, news organizations that are training on the spot as well. So if you think that you have the desire to be a storyteller of different formats, it doesn't have to be on TV, it could be on the web as well now. There are opportunities to look for there. I know news organizations are looking for interns and recruits that they could build and develop. The most important part to me, I think, is if you have a natural curiosity, and even if you're shy, somehow it works. Because I'm a very
Mm,
shy person in person, but for some reason I'm okay with cameras and microphones in my face. So I think it's creator's sense of humor, because
mm,
in certain situations. But I do recall, I remember the first time that I was on radio, feeling very nervous and very shaky, and wasn't sure if I wanted to do this after dreaming about it all my life and then getting into it.
mm.
And I prayed and I said, God, you need to help me if this is what you want me to do. And I don't remember ever being nervous in front of a camera or microphone after that
Wow.
moment. So it has to be also very much a passion, I think.
Mm.
There are many different ways to jump into it, but if you do have that passion, there'll be room for you there.
Hmm. And so what was the hardest thing, or like some of the best things or the hardest things about being an Indigenous journalist?
Some of the hardest at the beginning for me when I entered in was in 2005. Were especially our women and girls that were victims of MMIW, for example. We were in the media still calling them prostitutes, street workers, living alternative lifestyle, that kind of a description. And we would use police mugshots. And it was during that time I started to see families starting to push back and say, no, if you're going to tell my story, you're going to give her name, tell her people that she was loved, that she was an auntie, she was a sister, and you're going to use this picture. So they started making their own, you know, their own guidelines on how they wanted their loved ones to be portrayed. So at the beginning it was really weird and awkward to be in that space because I felt uncomfortable, but at the same time I didn't feel the authority or the power to challenge it at the time. So I
Mhm.
wasn't confident yet at that time, but I was there feeling awkward. But then when I really started paying attention to the stories that were being told, the organically I started asking questions of my bosses to say, are we going to allow this to be told about certain, aspects of the story? And a couple of times I marched into my old boss's office and I said, I'm embarrassed to work for you because you do this and that. I was a little bit Joe Jackie there a couple.
Joan Jackie. That's funny.
So it just sort of happened organically. So that was the good part. I started to see transformations in the media and public discussions. And then as the voices got stronger and stronger in the media, I saw in that 10 years, when I started 2005 to 2015, the issue of MMIW became a national election issue in 2015 because of the work that incredible women and activists and families did on the streets and in the media to raise awareness. And it forced the governments of that day that wanted to form government to answer whether or not there would be an inquiry called. And the Liberals won that time and made good on their promise to do that. And imperfect or perfect process or not, it still happened because of the incredible advocacy of our people and our women and girls mostly, and with their children in tow. So I feel like I was a witness to all of it. So that was the really cool part.
Hmm. Cool.
Hmm.
If you would do it, geez, I've never really done a podcast. I feel like asking all kinds of maybe kind of reporty kind of questions.
That's
I'm
okay.
being a bit Sheila Northy here. So if you could do something different, like looking back, on your career as a journalist, like if you start again, what would be something you would do different?
Well, I would definitely be quicker to take my place and to make space and to take space.
Mm,
Before, I didn't feel adequate and I didn't feel confident.
mm,
It toughened me up to be there though, because I had to be really brave to ask questions because it's not easy running up to a group of people and looking for a spokesperson and asking questions. You have to have a lot of gumption and even
Mhm.
a bit of you know, leadership ability to be able to do that, is because it's not always easy, especially when you're looking at, you know, a very sad group or an angry group, or
Mhm.
you know, different situations that you find. So I would definitely think I would try to get to a place where I felt more confident and more comfortable sooner. But even with our Indigenous people, sometimes one big mistake I remember making was there was a group of protesters from one of the northern communities about hydro. And so they were all coming down to Winnipeg. And so I went to meet them as one of the reporters. And there was a Kukum sitting on a bench by herself among the groups taking a break. So I wanted to give her the opportunity to tell me, and possibly use in the story, of why she wanted to be there, why she traveled all the way there. But because of the timelines and the haste that you're in when you're a journalist in that situation, I asked her quickly, "What are you doing here?" And she kind of was taken back by that. And then she answered. And then when the microphone and the camera was off, she pulled my arm back and said, "You hurt me." She said, "You asked, why did you made me feel like what are you doing here? You don't belong here." Like that kind of questioning. And I did not intend to make her feel like that, but I reflected and I said, "Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say, what are you doing here? You don't belong here." But because of the way that I asked, and it wasn't our way, you know.
Mhm.
So we have to incorporate our way when we communicate with our people still.
Yeah.
And so she probably felt safe enough and wise enough, of course, to correct me, to say, "You don't talk to elders, especially like that. Even in that situation, you don't
Yeah.
just jump on them and say, 'What are you doing here?'"
Yeah, that's always a hard one. I know even like with my personality, I'm so rambunctious, you know. My auntie told me a story one time that she said we were in a conversation, Auntie Jess and she was just quiet and I said, "What do you think? What do you think? Come on, what do you think?" And she's like, "Joan, I'm actually thinking." I said, "No, you're not. You just don't like what I said. You just don't like what I said." And she's like, "No, I'm actually thinking." And I was like, "Okay." And then when she was done, and then she said, "I'm going to tell you something." She said, "Inside each of us, think of it like this. There's a blue flame." And she said, "We all have the ability and develop the ability to turn that flame up and down, you know, depending on the situation and all of that. So
Mhm,
that's one thing you gotta get conscious of, you know?" And then
mhm,
she said, "The other thing that I have to deal with is that everyone has a natural set point for their blue flame, you
mhm.
know? And so some people's natural set point is quite soft and a low, soft flame." And she said, "Being around you, your natural set point is."
I would
That's
have to agree. Just kidding.
and that's just my natural set point,
Yeah.
which means that I have had to take special care in our cultural context, you
Mm,
know, to turn my flame way down. Like as a foster mother, with some of the natural parents of the children I fostered, I practically, for me, what it feels like is I practically have to turn my flame off in
mm,
order to create a space where they feel brave enough to say what's on their mind, eh? So I
mm.
totally get what you're saying, and I get reminded that I've got the wrong flame. It's getting
Setting. Yeah,
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 the wrong
yeah.
setting. It's getting better as I get older, but that was really a great
But there
story.
are times where their high flame needs to be set, right? There are certain situations where that does come in handy. So
Thank
I
you. Yeah, yeah.
appreciate people that have that
That
ability like you
natural,
do.
that natural burning torch. I asked my husband one time, "What's it like being married to me?" And he cried and he said, "You know those not National Geographic movies?" And I'm like, where is he going with this? And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "In them you see those cougars or black cats or whatever creeping along, then all of a sudden they pounce." And he said, "That's what it's like being married to you. It's so exciting." He said, "I never know what you're gonna jump up and do next." So that's the other thing. Find somebody who appreciates your natural set point in terms of your flame.
Yeah,
Follow me for more marriage advice.
yeah, yeah.
So uh, then you became Grand Chief.
Yes, yes, ma'am. That was, I mean, when I was asked to run as Grand Chief, I kind of actually laughed because I didn't see myself as that. And I remember exactly where I was on Broadway when I was asked that question, and I was with a camera guy, and I was in the middle of a workday, and I laughed, and I said, I can't talk about it right now. And then more people started calling me, and then I thought, oh, I guess this is a serious thing. So then I started talking to my family, my mom, my dad, my kids, my husband at the time, and they were, of course, supportive because that's who they are. And then, I was starting to get into the groove of the idea, I guess. Even though I still didn't feel confident, I still didn't feel adequate to be a grand chief. I'm like, I worked for a grand chief, but I don't think I can be one. But other people saw that I could, and I had I had to go up north a few times, and I had conversations there with other people. But it wasn't until I met this woman named Marilyn Wood. She's from she was from Garden Hill. She was a former counselor at the time, and when I met her, I asked her, I said I was being asked to run for MKO, and I kind of chuckled about it, right? I was feeling a little shy or embarrassed about it. And then she said, well, she said, don't think it's a compliment you're being asked. This is your responsibility. And she took that completely into a different realm for me and in my head. And it really kicked me in the butt to take
Mm,
it seriously. And it's not just a thing to discuss or to even think about. It was like a
mm,
job prospect. She
mm,
really kicked me in the butt, and I realized, yeah, okay, like, do I need to? Do I? Is it time for me to give back in some way from the
mm,
community that has given me? I felt so much, even though I was still, you know, just a mom with two kids, and I wasn't, I was a journalist and stuff like that. So I felt like I did have to give back. So from
mm,
there, we assembled a team, and we went to work like little badgers for 2 months and met as many people as we could, and had lots of conversations. And thankfully, my journalism career came in handy because I was able to articulate and to present ideas in
mhm,
short amount of times or long if I needed to. So I was
mm,
able to adjust the messaging because of what I learned in media. And being a strategist, I think when we were during Idle No More, I was able to learn or be taught to be a strategist in some way a bit at the time.
mm,
So all of those skills made me, I guess, a good candidate because I also was able to speak on all kinds of issues because as a journalist, you have to think about multiple issues all the time. So I was able to learn on the job about our communities and what our communities need and what our communities are saying, uh, what they don't want. So I was able to portray that to the
mm,
chiefs that I was talking
accurately.
to. And
Mhm,
it wasn't only the chiefs that I had to talk to. MKO election include both the chief and council. So my voter base was 186 or something like that.
mhm,
So it was not just the Chiefs. Like AMC only gives the Chiefs the votes,
mhm,
but MKO gives both the council and the Chiefs. So it was a big group of people that I had to try and talk
mm,
to.
mhm. So for those listening outside of from that aren't from Manitoba or maybe even in Manitoba, AMC stands for Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, and MKO is Manitoba Kiwetinoki, and
Mhm.
that's the northern, because our province is divided politically into there's a provincial um, non-government organization advocacy. That's the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, and there's MKO, and then there's the Southern Chiefs organization. So you became the Grand Chief of how many are there in the north?
Well,
30,
there was 31 at the time,
31 at the time. Yeah,
but
yeah.
now without Island Lake, there's 4 less, so I think there's 26 or something like that
Yeah,
right
yeah, yeah.
now. Mhm.
So I remember a couple of things I want to touch on there. I remember when you were running, because my judgment or my perception of the Northern Chiefs is that they're never gonna elect a woman. Like hell's gonna freeze over before they elect.
I actually heard that from other people, like, "Hell no, not gonna happen."
Like, oh well, good. I'm really proud of you, Sheila. I'm glad you're giving that a go. You got my
Mhm,
support, but good luck with that. Why do
mhm.
you think a group of male chiefs, primarily? I mean, there are some women, you know, um, thinking of the woman from Fox Lake. I can't remember her name. I can see her. Beck,
Oh, you mean Betsy
Betty,
Kennedy?
Betsy
Betsy
Kennedy. Like
One.
there are some long-standing female chiefs in the north, and then there are the odd time there'll be a female chief in the north, but primarily it's entirely. And you speak about this in your book.
Mhm.
I've read your book, and you speak a bit about it in your book about how this went for you. But why do you think you were successful? What made you successful as a woman and as Indigenous woman in the context of our politics, where, in my lived experience, misogyny is alive and well, and we are not treated well. We're not treated well as leaders. We're not treated well at the community level, and not by everybody, of course. I mean, heck, I'm
Mhm.
married to the same guy 30 years. There's lots of men that can treat you well, in Indian country. But why did you win? How did you win?
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with timing and who was also on the slate, right?
Ah,
So that was a big factor. Um, the people that I was in this on the slate with, one was being actively being ousted, I guess, is a good way to say it. They lost confidence at the time of the Grand Chief, and the other two candidates had l- one didn't have a political experience. I think one of the other ones did, but I guess I had a public persona as well that also helped because I was in the media and people knew me, so that was a big factor. Um, and I think I was able to present the ideas and the topics in short ways that catering to people's attention spans and time that they had to assess the candidate. So
hmm.
I don't know. I guess it was a lot of it would be luck as well and timing, creators' timing. I mean, I'm really proud of the fact that they actually elected me as their
Yeah,
first Grand
yeah.
Chief. I was really proud of them. But it did take a lot of effort as well. Like, was one of the other candidates was constantly reminding me that I was a woman and saying, "Oh, good for you! I'm just so cute that you're running." One time he got off the podium while we were talking, like taking turns, and then he got off the podium and came straight over to shake my hand and then kiss me, and I moved away and he kissed me in the
Oh
eye.
my God. Yeah.
So I
So
think it was timing. It was mostly that, and of course, some of the chiefs that I did talk to, and they were being asked about it. I think it actually only came up a couple times.
mm,
Someone in the media asked one of the chiefs if MK was ready for a woman, and the answer that this chief gave was, "Well, let me think. Most of when I'm at home, it's the women that know what to do in the house, so they tell me what to do. When I was growing up, my mom told me what to do, and my sisters and my aunties. So yeah, I think they have leadership skills and abilities." So
that's something else that's so interesting, because there's such a disconnect from our reality, in this, as women, in terms of the space we are able to exercise leadership and power, within our homes. Like, I don't even know how to talk about it. Like, I'm not a trained feminist or social scientist or whatever, but why, I'm always thinking, why is there such a resistance to having us move into roles of leadership you know, whether it's voiced like clearly out, like, somebody saying, well, no, we never had women for leaders and we don't want women for leaders, as our front people. But that might be a discussion for another conversation. But yeah, because in the end, I think around the world, it's not just an Indigenous thing. I think as women, and maybe that's too much of a generalization. In the circles I've moved in, ultimately, sayings like happy wife, happy life,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
for whatever reasons, we have power as women and we have responsibility as women, that comes with that power. And if we are willing, I know in my own lived experience, when I'm willing in my own marriage or my own family to own that power and just say, no, that's not, that's not what's happening, everybody just gets in line, you know?
Mhm.
Or my mom, like if my mom, like, and it's as we age too, like the matriarchs in our families, as we age, if Cookham just gives you the witchy eye, you're like frozen stiff. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, she doesn't even have to say anything.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have an elderly woman in your family like that. They just give you the little eye and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm starting to learn to do that to my little 3-year-old grandbaby. I'm like,
Yeah,
and then he knows. So it's
exactly.
yeah, it comes naturally for sure.
Yeah. So
Um,
I wish for us to move to a day when we talk about those things and um, address what is our role as in leadership as Indigenous women in this century, like in the present time. So yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but
sure, let me
sure,
I will, but let me answer Catherine Ann's question about
sure.
thinking about giving the vote to
Oh,
people.
nice.
She
Yeah.
I mean, I think yes, I think that's important. I think that would be good. It's something that I thought about when I was Grand Chief on how that could possibly happen. And I think the idea generally is accepted, but it will take some effort at the policy level to change that. And sometimes there's no time to do anything other than the very basics and the tops. When chiefs do get together, when leaders did get together, my experience was that there was so much discussion and so much need for discussion that not everything got to the table, and sadly that's one of the ones. So it has to be a huge effort to, I think, change the organizational structure to allow that to happen. It would have to be a concerted effort for that, right? Because it would include funding changes and organizational changes and things like that.
And then the other piece, Sheila, I'm sure you've thought about this and been involved in discussions about it. The other piece, that if we went to one person, one vote with any of our grand chiefs in anywhere, then what happens to the power of the local government of our on the reserve, or in the
Mhm.
Métis community?
That's true,
You
yeah.
know, you can see it in the Métis Nation. The Métis Nation kind of operates like that, where the president of the Manitoba Métis Federation is the guy, he's the guy.
Did you
And
say the guy or the
the
guy?
guy, I said, the guy, that's funny. The guy,
Okay, the guy.
for the Cree speakers out there, they'll get that. So he's the man. I'll say, okay, so he's the man, and the locals delegate their power up to him, and he is the president, like a corporate structure, Whereas in Indian country, for lack of a better word, the power to govern outside of hereditary chief, outside of hereditary, or I'm not talking about our original
Yeah.
systems of governance at all, the clan systems, and not talking about that, but within the Indian Act and the legislative framework of Canada, where the power is in the Indian Act bands, the 624 bands.
Mhm.
So the chief of the band and the council of the band are the ones with the legal power.
Mhm.
And so if the citizens that they represent were able to vote in a grand chief of these chiefs, what would happen to their power?
Right.
And then would the federal government even, or provincial government, or anybody even bother talking to our local chiefs.
True.
So I think that's where some of the resistance
True.
is going to one person, one vote, you know. Yeah, because and it's a but I don't think that it's not something we shouldn't be thinking about as Indigenous people. The evolution of our own governance systems, you know, whether it's through another structure, might be through the numbered treaties, you know, the treaties 1 to 11, you know,
Mhm.
that maybe we would want some kind of one person, one vote structure through there. But no one's really engaging on this. This is the Joan comment. Like, no one's really engaging in this conversation other than grassroots people bringing it up, um, that I know of at in these places, because people are loath to give up power they already have.
Yeah.
So they're
Yeah.
yeah,
It's that cycle of poverty that still operates in our mindset, I think, right? Like we have so little, so when we get something, it's hard
yeah,
to give up
yeah,
because, we've gone without it for so long. And so when
yeah,
you get to that level, it's
yeah.
hard to go back.
The scarcity, like to believe that there's enough, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
Before we move on to where you're at now, I wanted to also say, in terms of your election, I'm guessing that you had a strong team, and your career even, that you have a strong team of us. Maybe it's a small team, I don't know, of
Mhm.
supporters that help you. They're on your team.
Mhm.
And oh, my daughter's calling me in the middle of. I got That's my God shot. That oh, you're not that important. Your kids don't even listen to your don't even listen to your podcast. Poof. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, definitely have people that I met in '97 when I first moved to Winnipeg. Um, it was Jennifer and Darcy Wood, that I was introduced to when I was an economic development intern. And at the time, when I was working for a community future organization, I was introduced to Jennifer and Darcy when Jennifer was in the middle of beginning to be the campaign, one of the campaign managers for Phil Fontaine at the time in '97. So she was recruiting volunteers at the time. And so I was on the same floor as their campaign office. And so I was introduced to them because they were friends with my old boss at the time. And, you know, I was introduced to the whole thing about politics. I mean, at that level, I already knew who Phil Fontaine was, and I already knew who Ovid was because my dad was a political junkie from the beginning. I knew who Jennifer and Darcy were friends with Elijah. So being in that circle and being in that um, just was mind boggling and so cool for me. So I gladly volunteered. So ever since then, I feel like I was trained and groomed in a way, not officially, but organically, to think of leadership. And I would have never entered it myself. It wasn't a lifelong desire or dream to be in leadership. But I accepted the call because of the different situations I found myself in. But Jennifer and Darcy have been there since that time, and then
Hmm.
of course my own kids and a lot of good friends I've met along the way that I feel like I could call if I'm stuck somewhere. And I've called you a couple times there, Joan, since I've met you.
Yeah.
And then there's some chief friends of mine, and the late Elijah Harper's wife, Anita, is also still very
Hmm.
integral in my life. When I go to Ottawa, I'm privileged to be able to stay at her house and
Mhm.
sit in Elijah's chair that he loves so much. So I
Mhm.
get to sit in this chair and just, reminisce a bit about,
Hmm.
um, leadership from that era. And so I do have very few people, but they're very important and significant.
Mhm. Yeah. I
Mhm.
don't know if Jennifer's ever told you, but every time, I don't talk to her often, but when I do talk to her, I always say to her, I'm so jealous that Sheila has you. I'm so jealous.
Yeah,
Where's my Jennifer Wood? God, I'm like,
yeah, yeah.
because she's so she occurs for me as so how do you say, dogged in a good way. Like she's
Mhm.
just always trudging and just trudging and trudging for the people, so
Always, always from behind the scenes.
yeah,
A
yeah,
lot. She's been a part of many movements and many
yeah,
main most of the Indigenous leaders that we know about. She's had a hand in some
yeah,
way of
yeah,
supporting them. So I'm
yeah,
lucky and blessed
very
to.
lucky, yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. So I'm super excited to hear what you're doing now. Yeah, like what are you up to now? Tell us how you got there. Like there's always a story, the connections, like yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So I was at CBC until, oh, I guess August of last year. So almost a year ago. And then I got asked to again run for the second time for Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs um, election when Kathy Merritt got in, Grand
Mhm,
Chief Kathy Merritt
mhm.
got in. So I was one of the first ones off the ballot at the time. And now I don't even want to go into that scenario. A lot of things happened up into that and during that. But at the time, I had to resign completely from CBC
Mm,
to be able to run. So I gave up my lifelong dream that I worked my whole life to get um, to give up, to run. And I don't say that begrudgingly or even with any animosity of any kind, but I did give it up for that because I felt an obligation again to run and put my name in. And I don't regret it um, because I realize now, I'll just jump off the trail there for a second. I realize now that dream to be a journalist and that dream to be an anchor kept
mhm,
me alive many, many times.
mm,
Abusive relationships I was in great levels and depths of poverty that I was in. I dreamt about being an anchor, and that
mm,
dream made me keep going and motivated me and kept me alive, literally sometimes.
yeah,
So I appreciate that, and I look back at the dream that I had, and I think, dreams are meant to be achieved, but they're also just a ladder or a rope to keep you alive. So I'm grateful for the dream that I given by Creator, and I appreciate it. But it also is not the end of the road. So
mm.
beyond that, I was um, I was contacted by people from the International Commission on Missing Persons. See, my Cree accent tries to slip out here every once in a while. um, and they were looking for a Canadian or an Indigenous person to lead up the program, the work that ICMP was tasked to do in
Can
Canada.
you can you tell us a bit about ICMP?
Yeah.
I'd never heard of it. I don't even know what they do or where. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the International Commission on Missing Persons is a treaty-based organization, and it's based in the Netherlands, The Hague, specifically The Hague, where all the international courts are, right? So
Mhm,
they are based in The Hague, and they do work all around the world.
mm,
And they've been in doing work in 40 countries.
mm.
Right now, they're in Ukraine, they're in Syria, they're in Mexico, they're in Bosnia. So what they do is they work on a treaty basis with a state or a government to to work with communities and organizations on going to search for unmarked graves and then also help identify them through DNA processing through a lab that they have. And they're the only organization in the world dedicated to missing persons. So
Mm,
this is what they do
mm,
all the time at ICMP, and they had one stint in Canada officially when the La Mégantic train derailment happened and that big explosion 10 years ago in
mhm,
Quebec, the train
mhm.
explosion. So Canada brought them in to help with the DNA identification of the victims. So
Oh,
they're able to do that. And and here and there, RCMP and other organizations have contacted ICMP for really hard cold cases of identification.
Okay.
So they do DNA matching and lab work to identify the remains of people in disaster zones, um, migration issues, or even um, organized crime issues like in Mexico, um, and disasters. Like so, they are called in to help find people in unmarked graves, and they look at it as a form of justice for the dead and a form of peace for the families to
Mhm.
have some resolution to losing their loved ones. And they, when I was there in The Hague doing some training, I learned about one family which resonated with me. This one woman from Bosnia, she, her son was part of this explosion that happened. I think it was during war, and for 20 years, her and her colleagues and her friends and family, her neighbors, all gave DNA samples because they wanted their loved ones identified. But she
Oh,
waited out and held out for 20 years, not wanting to provide her DNA because she was in denial that her son was gone.
oh,
And so she didn't want to give it up. So after 20 years, she finally said, okay. So she gave her DNA, and there was a match right
mm,
away. So it just confirmed to her what she was trying to avoid for 20 years. So
mm,
I felt for her because I can't imagine what it's like having to admit that in your mind that your loved one is gone, they're not coming back.
mm,
So this is the kind of work that they do. And when the 2015 discoveries were made in Kamloops, um, there was many of us pundits at the time, including myself, on national TV saying we need international help to find out what happened. We can't just solely rely on federal government and the RCMP to do work in identifying unmarked graves. And so Cross Lake, the Michigamak Cree Nation, was one of the communities that reached out to their local MP to see if they can find an international body. And so they did, and they found ICMP because of the work and reputation of ICMP. And so the engagement started happening with ICMP and Canada, CERDAC specifically. And 2 years,
what is Surdux?
sorry,
What is Surdux?
CERNAC is, oh, what is the acronym? It's the ISC, it's the Indigenous
Oh,
Services Canada.
they keep they keep
Crown
changing
Indigenous.
names. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, INAC basically.
yeah. Indian Affairs.
Yeah. So they started
Okay.
working out an arrangement, a technical arrangement for ICMP to come to Canada to do some cross, you know, a learning process where ICMP would learn from Indigenous communities, but also we would share knowledge of what's been done around the world in terms of searching unmarked graves and identifying
Hmm.
remains. So our initial task was to come to Canada and meet experts, first of all, to give us the lay of the land of what we should expect. Forensic anthropologists, archaeologists, government officials, stuff like that. And then also leadership at our level, our elders and our leaders and knowledge keepers to learn from them. And then we were going to fan out to communities,
Mm,
35, at least 35 different community or regions
mm,
across Canada to talk to communities about what the process would be like if they wanted, in fact, to actually search the unmarked graves, have those discussions of what that would look like. But now we've had to regroup and rethink on the delivery of that. At the end of it all, we were going to provide a report to the communities and families first, and then to the government on what communities want. Some communities we're already hearing are saying don't disturb the unmarked graves, just leave them as they are, and we'll commemorate them instead. And some communities are saying we want exhumation and we want identification. So
mm,
um, that was our big task. And I was one of the first, well, actually, I was the first people hired out of Canada
mm,
to lead that and to find a group of people to help um, set up information sessions
mm.
to have those discussions.
Wow. So, oh my goodness, so many things that this is so interesting. So the first thing stuck in my mind is that in this matching process, a DNA bank of the families, like the
Hmm.
Bosnia situation,
Hmm.
uh, needs to be created because how are they going to match them?
Exactly.
So I had not even had that thought before.
It's a
So
difficult thing to think about, right? And it would be very sensitive to have
yeah,
those conversations. Can you imagine going to Barons River and saying, "Everyone sign up. We're gonna," it hurts to even think about, but it's also a necessary thing
yeah.
that happens around the world.
And then I've raised at least one daughter who's like almost a conspiracy theorist. I don't know how that
Yeah,
happened. It wasn't my fault. I don't know. But I could imagine asking my daughter
oh,
to give up her DNA. She'd be like, "Forget it, man. You know,
yeah,
the police brutality and all of this stuff, and I'm not giving
absolutely.
anybody my damn DNA." And so, yeah, like how would this wow.
The crazy thing is too on that is people are doing that for entertainment purposes, for example, and maybe also genuine curiosity through those
Oh, yeah,
23andMe apps and things
yeah,
like
yeah,
that,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So people willingly give up their DNA in those situations where they're trying to find out their backgrounds or
yeah.
who their relatives are. So it already happens, but to think about it in this way is going to be difficult, and that's where we wanted to meet with communities to get their input on what we should be doing and how we should be approaching it.
Yeah.
Ceremony definitely would be a part of it because we can't just simply go out like I did as a green journalist and say, "What are you doing here?" Blah blah blah. Take that approach at all because
Yeah, yeah,
you're going to hurt people and re-victimize. So
yeah, yeah,
learning to be able to have those conversations in a respectful way will be
yeah.
part of our big tasks.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's just mind-boggling. Huh. So
Mhm.
now you talked about how there's other people involved in the organization you're with now, as a part
Mhm.
of your Canadian team. So, you have a staff or that you're
I have
leading?
I've hired one person so far to work with me, doing a lot of research
Yeah.
and a lot of uh, writing with me, writing and but we're going to need a coordinator to help us with the logistics, but also we're going to need facilitators, at
Mhm.
least 6 across Canada, to
Mm.
go into their different respective regions to have
Oh.
these discussions and have these conversations.
Mm.
So we'll have to train them up to know what to present and
Yeah.
where to ask direct questions when they happen.
Mhm.
So there'll be that process. But yeah, we put out a call for hire, but we had to pause and um, regroup again. So we probably won't be hiring or looking for finding people until September again.
Mm.
Mhm.
And so how does this in my mind, I'm trying to fit this all in. So how okay, so this is out of The Hague. It's a global initiative. It's conducted through a treaty, you said, between the organization and the country.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah,
But
and
this
so
in
what has
Canada is
happened
a
in
technical
Canada here?
in
What has
Canada,
happened?
we're operating on a technical arrangement, and
Ah,
it's different from an agreement because we're not subjected to what Canada's wants to find. So an arrangement allows ICMP to have the independence still of doing the work and having its own opinions and own findings
mhm,
for the benefit of the communities because um, that is the main and important thing.
mhm.
Having that autonomy is to develop reports based on true findings and not perceived or you know um,
Convenient,
prescribed.
whatever.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
So so just so I'm clear and the listeners are clear, so Canada has contracted the organization you're with to do this work
Hmm.
in relation to the discovery of unmarked graves at residential school sites throughout Canada.
Yes, at least at the initial phase of what hearing what communities want to do if they
Ah,
That's
So it's a buy-in. It's a buy-in
it's a
process.
buy-in operation right now. Although there are specifically two communities in Canada that are interested in considering signing a direct MOU with
Mhm,
ICMP to do the to do some of the work,
mhm.
including well, I won't say specifically, but there
Yeah.
are there is a community that is at that ready level already
Mhm,
that is considering
mhm,
the work
mm,
that the ICMP can do
mhm.
that is you know that is already at that level
Wow.
of readiness. So
Mm,
yeah,
cool.
we're considering that and using that as also information gathering initiative so we could share with communities what has been done and what was able to be achieved in
Mhm,
those two cases.
mhm. Hmm,
Mhm.
hmm. Yeah, I don't know what. Yeah, I don't. It's
so
it's so complicated.
so
And
I guess in the easiest way to put it right now is our task is to go across Canada to talk to communities about what's been done across the world on approaching unmarked graves.
mm,
It's not a company. ICMP is not a company. It's an organization.
mhm,
So it's not like a GPS company who would be hired to scan the grounds, right?
mhm,
Although ICMP does have the capabilities of that, but that wouldn't be the main thing. And we're not a company that sells the services. We're an organization that would work with families and communities to do the work and
mm.
coming up with ways collaboratively on how we can approach, for example, the DNA or a collection of samples
Yeah.
if needed.
It's more about it's oh, that was a loud noise. It's more about process.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
more about process. And
Yeah.
I see it at the level of relationship.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I'm glad that Canada saw that and responded to the call of the chiefs to have this because at least I think that they're thinking about what's possible is what they're thinking and how would what could be done. So
Yeah.
they're curious about what communities want if they want to do that at all. And
And
if they do,
ultimately what I see clearly is that um if there was somebody missing in my family, you know, it would be up to my family whether or not we participated
mhm,
in this and the DNA. But then the other, I just can't get it out of my head. The like in situations where the remains of our ancestors, of our loved ones, are not have not been buried in single.
mhm,
Uh, like there's other issues related to. You may have one family that does say yes, we want to identify our loved one, you know, and give them a proper funeral, for lack of a better words, you
mhm,
know, do our ceremony and put them away ourselves right, not the way it happened, because that's what we need for our healing. And in the same space of ground, literally, you can have another family saying,
mhm,
no, what our family needs is we just need to leave things as they are
mhm.
and not disturb our ancestor, and we're going to have ceremony like that. And then what do you do?
Exactly. Exactly. And those are the conversations that we still have to have. And
Wow.
we're already hearing from some communities that are on both, like
Yeah.
saying, let's just leave them and we'll have commemoration instead. And some saying, no, we want to bring them
Yeah.
home because they're so far away from home and
Yeah.
we want to know where they are.
That's the other thing. I wasn't even thinking of that in that context that you just presented. I
Mhm,
was thinking of that in the context where the ancestors in the ground are all from the same community. But
mhm.
as we all know, the residential schools housed people from many communities.
Exactly.
That's another layer of. So I guess, you know, where with my mind, where I'd have to land is this is another opportunity for us to reconcile
Mhm,
inside our own communities,
mhm,
because that's the primary place in my mind that reconciliation needs to happen, is
mhm.
each of our own lives,
Right.
each of our own families, each of our own communities, and then I'll worry about any white people that I might have to reconcile with. Like
Mhm.
I don't even like we have so much reconciliation to do within our own communities as the collateral damage of
Mhm.
colonization and the continued legalized racism. The damage continues. Kids are still being apprehended at birth today. Today, their child will be taken from them in a hospital somewhere in Canada just because they're on a birth alert, you
Yeah.
know? And so the legalized racism continues today.
Mhm.
Somebody will maybe probably die at the hands of police forces today.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
mean, there's all kinds of injustice. So it's like super complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. And and the other thing that we have to remember ourselves when we go in any case around the world is managing expectations, right? Because it'll be difficult to, in some situations, identify some remains because they didn't have children. They didn't get to have children of their own, for example,
Mm,
and their
mm,
relatives might be long gone.
mhm,
And so there'll be challenges like that that we know
mm,
we have to be able to discuss that thoroughly with families and make sure that we're not setting up people for false hope or disappointment
mhm.
or greater harm, right? And so we'll have to find people that are very sensitive and um, loving to our communities to be able to
Yeah.
have those conversations. And one thing I want to make sure that we're clear about too is, there's been portrayal, I guess, of ICMP going around collecting DNA at this level. And that's
Mhm,
totally not the case at all. That's not even,
mhm.
a part of the discussions we're having. And we're not even at that level. So if you hear anything like that, you can correct people and say that's not actually happening.
No. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's all kinds of fear mongering all the time
Oh
in
yeah, yeah.
in our communities, especially where in my most cynical moments, I hate it when I feel like this,
Oh,
but
there's a
it's
famous
like,
bride walking by.
my husband.
Sorry, yeah.
That's okay. No, no, no. This is how my God keeps me humble. Like my family all love me, but they don't even care what I'm doing. And they're like, oh yeah, that's just mom, whatever. That's just Joan. She's doing something. So I lost my thought completely when you
Oh,
went.
so sorry.
No, no, no. That's okay. It doesn't matter. Okay, I like to keep it to about an hour because, like you were talking about
Mhm,
attention span, even an hour is a long time. But if I'm
mhm,
driving, I listen to podcasts when I'm driving.
mhm.
So in our closing, what would you like to say in closing? Because the hour is gone. Imagine.
Yeah, yeah, no. I guess in closing is I get asked a lot about women in leadership,
Mm,
and I see you as one. We had some crazy moments in different times, right? During Idle No More and then during the Treaty Freedom Ride, we had some
yeah,
really
yeah.
tense and cool times. And to me, it's not about female, male leadership. I feel like we all have a role, we all have abilities. And when we're called to take those steps, I think we need to be brave enough to do that. And even though there's no guarantee of success of any kind, including myself, but I think we have to take up those opportunities and be brave enough to do that. And it's not easy. I know it's hard to put your name up for elections and for scrutiny, and it's not easy to always answer questions of what your hopes are and what your plans are because you want to be respectful. But at the same time, you can't please everyone. So I think you'll have to when you're in going into leadership or want to be in leadership to rely on your god-given instincts because they
Mm,
come up, the blood memory comes up, and the
mm,
creator finds a way to bring up what needs to be said at that moment. And sometimes I've learned the hard way that it's not something that people want to hear all the time. But we have to be brave enough. And I'll leave with this. One chief told me from Alberta, 150 years ago, we were meant to be extinct. 150 years, we're still here. We're in every facet of society. 150 years, where will we be if we keep going? So I feel like this is a moment in time as we're talking about reconciliation. Us as Indigenous people are also in that uncomfortable phase of renewal and um, hard discussions. Uh,
Mm,
I hope when my grandbaby is 18, 20 years old, we'll have different discussions. That
mm,
it won't just be about whether or not it's good for real male, female role model or leadership. I think I want to be beyond those and just
mm.
talk about the real issues that are affecting our people, right? And so, not that that's not a real issue, but I think um, I just want people to feel that they do have place and space, no
Mm,
matter what the
yes.
outline looks like,
Mhm.
and encourage people to be brave in those opportunities and not be afraid of people and their faces.
Can you mention your book, please? Because I enjoyed reading it. I read it and I really enjoyed getting to know you. It's so personal.
Okay, sure. It's called My Privilege, My Responsibility. And that comes from that conversation I had with Marilyn Wood, who said, don't think of it as a compliment or a privilege. And so I also think about my life as from my parents who gave me a lot of good privilege and opportunity to have to be raised in a good home, good family, and now I feel responsible to live out, their dreams and aspirations they had for us to have a good life. So I look at that two levels. I wrote it during the pandemic. It gave me something to do. Great Plains Publishing out of Winnipeg. The directors asked me to think about it, so I did. We came up with a timeline, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life is to
Mm,
sit down and write that
mm.
darn thing. And when I look at it now, there's a couple of mistakes here and there that I see, even though me and editors have went through it 5 times. There's always little mistakes here. So, but it is for people, I think, that want to know what it's like to grow up on a reserve and then come to the city and the challenges,
Mhm.
and then also having the opportunity to live beyond just our statistics of, you know, being abjectly poor and not being able to realize our dreams, but sort of on the opposite side of what could happen when people move past those challenges and actually achieve things. So it's a perspective on that, because there are many thrivers, as you know, Joan, and we don't hear their steps to get to where they are all the time. And when you see university grads who went to school mostly on reserves, I always say bow to them because they've done so much to get to that point. Because
Yeah,
it's not easy. We're always 2 grades behind on reserves,
yeah.
at least. And
That's
then when you get to that post secondary level,
yeah,
forget it. It's hard.
yeah, yeah.
You actually meet someone like that, they're a unicorn.
Yeah, I dream of a day when I'm not having conversations where I'm an anomaly, you know,
Hmm.
where the kind of woman I am is the norm for us as
Hmm.
Indigenous women, that
Hmm.
I be and do what I choose, and
Hmm.
that's who I am.
Hmm.
And I wish that to be our norm
Yes.
as human beings, who
Yeah.
happen to I express my humanity in terms of my gender as a woman.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, for me, I'm so thankful that you took the time to do this. Like, I know how extremely busy you are, and I can't get this memory out of my head, so I'm just going to share it. When we were on the Treaty Freedom ride, I hadn't ridden a bike in like, oh my God, 20 years. And I went and bought deceased Chief Debbie Chief's bike. She had a Honda Shadow, a 600 Honda Shadow, which I think was a magic motorcycle, which is because I rode behind Chief Neepanak, who was riding a big Harley then, and that damn guy, he rides at 120, rain or shine, like it's just like
Yeah.
120. And then I insisted on being, I always insisted, it annoys the men terribly, but I always insist on riding right behind him
Yes.
because we have to represent balance in what
Yeah.
the world sees, you know.
Yeah.
There's a man, there's a woman, and you know, and many times he said to me, "You lead to them." I'm like, no, I don't want to. It's too hard. Forget it. You do it. And so, you know, I'm always right behind him. And I think we were in Alberta somewhere. Not sure. It was sunny and hot that day. It's on my YouTube actually, I think.
Yeah.
Anyways, I came over the hill and my freaking throttle stuck. And
Mm.
I couldn't like it was so scary. Oh my God. And yeah, there's I'm not gonna talk about the whole thing now, but my memory of you is that I got off the bike and then Sheila comes running towards me. She's like, "What happened?" She's like, "I looked forward away." And I was like, "Oh my God, I just about died." And he's just like catching the story right there live, eh? Oh, I often think about that and how it's just a nice moment in our lives together and that
Yeah. Yeah.
documented. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was struggling. I love laughing. Almost I don't have not met an Indigenous person who doesn't like laughing. And
That's true. Me
all-
too.
tons of inappropriate things other cultures would see inappropriate, and we're like laughing.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I also remember our
oh, go ahead.
during
Yeah.
Idle No More,
Hmm.
and we're on
Go
Langevin building
ahead.
when
Tell it.
we were there at one of the biggest moments of Idle No More, massive rally from the Delta to Parliament Hill, and I was working for ANC, so I was with Grand Chief Neepanek at the time. So we all marched, and then we got to the Langevin building, which was the Prime Minister's office. And Stephen Harper was the Prime Minister. And when we got there, Joan said, "All the women stay here." So I'm like, okay. So I had to stay there with all of the women, and while everyone else went to meet the other group that was there. Anyhow, we had hoped that all the chiefs would wait together to meet the prime minister, but
Hmm.
some chose to accept the invitation to meet him, and one of them was former national chief Matthew Kunkam. And then he walked past the women to go into the meeting, and Joe and Jack's like, "What are you doing?" And she just,
I think he's forgiven me for that.
oh my gosh, that was the pivotal moment. I think we were crying when he went in, but then we all started laughing because we were like, "Joan, what the heck?" You just gave him crap right there and held him accountable at that very moment.
My
But
nose
it
is just
was
ready to bleed.
lots
God.
of emotions at the time. It
Yeah.
You were the brave one to call it out.
And Wob Canoe videoed our next premier of Manitoba. See where my politics lie. Wob videoed that moment, and it's on YouTube. Yeah,
Mhm.
and so it's so crazy because he Wob jumped up on something, so he has the camera way high, his phone, and
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I saw that. Yeah.
oh my God. Yeah, so I seem to have developed a nosebleed, so I think we're done.
Okay.
But
Okay.
one thing I wanted to say before I leave. So Brave Indigenous Conversations is all about the earrings, and for those of you watching on YouTube, I'm wearing Shiloh's earrings again. These are Jennifer Wood's daughter's art, and they're little moccasins. I just love them. Yeah. So
Cute.
I'm gonna end the video, and then you and I will say goodbye offline.
Okay.
So thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.